Good afternoon, everyone. And this is another session brought to you by the Department of Career Planning and Development at Chandigarh University. And I'm a soft skill trainer deployed to that department. Today's video is on the topic of how to effectively write the minutes of a meeting. So before we begin, allow me to explain what exactly is the minutes of a meeting. Meeting minutes, or MOM, that's for short, can be defined as the written record of everything that's happened during a meeting. They're used to inform people who didn't attend the meeting about what happened, or to keep track of what was decided during the meeting, or use the information provided for future reference. So now next step is trying to understand the purpose of the minutes of meeting. The purpose of minutes of meeting can be a little misleading, since it does not necessarily mean to keep a track of every minute of the entire interaction that happens during the meeting. What they're looking for is rather to capture the essence of the entire meeting, and including details such as if there were any decisions made, any motions were passed, any votes were held, and what are the next steps that are being planned or that were agreed upon, any identification or tracking of any actionable items that had to be undergone in the previous meeting that were assigned. Now, minutes are a tangible record of the meeting for its participants and a source of information for members who are unable to attend. So in some cases, meeting minutes can act as a reference point. For example, when a meeting's outcomes impact other collaborative activities or projects within the organization, or the minutes can serve to notify or remind individuals of tasks assigned to them and or specific deadlines or timelines which have been provided to them. A small fun fact: the minutes of meeting minutes don't refer to the minute measurement of time, but to the minute notes taken during the meetings. Next, we'll be understanding what should be included in the meeting minutes. Now, before you start taking notes, it is important to understand the type of information you need to record at the meeting. As noted earlier, the organization may have required content in a specific format that you need to follow, but generally, meeting minutes usually include the following. First is the date and the time of the meeting, names of the meeting participants and those unable to attend, acceptance or corrections or amendments to previous meeting minutes. Also, decisions made about each agenda item, for example, actions taken or agreed to be taken, next steps, voting outcomes like, if necessary, details regarding who made motions, who seconded and approved, or via show of hands. It is also about motions taken or rejected, items to be held over, new businesses that need to be ventured or explored, and also in the end, the next meeting's time, date, or basic just simple schedule. Now, there are some tips that might help you while you're taking notes. First, ensure that you create an outline. Now, as discussed earlier, having an outline or template based on the agenda makes it easy for you to simply jot down notes, decisions, etc. under each item as you go along. If you're taking notes by hand, consider including space below each item on your outline for your handwritten notes. Then print these out and use these to capture the minutes or the minutes. Check off attendees as they enter the room. If you know the meeting attendees, you can check them off as they arrive. If not, have folks introduce themselves at the start of the meeting or circulate an attendance list that they can check off themselves. Also ensure that you record decisions or notes on action items in your outline as soon as they occur to be sure that they are recorded correctly and accurately. Ask for clarification if necessary. For example, if the group moves on without making a decision or an obvious conclusion, ask for clarification of the decision and or next steps that are involved. Now, don't capture it all. You can't keep it up if you try to write down the conversation verbatim. So be sure to simply and clearly write or type just the decisions, the assignments, and the action steps, and any other examples that might be there. If required, the last suggestion is to record it. So literally, if you're concerned about being able to keep up with the note taking, consider recording the meeting. You can use your smartphone, iPad, any recording device that you might have. But be sure to let participants know that they are being recorded. While you don't want to use the recording to recreate a word-for-word transcript of the meeting, the recording can come in handy if you need any clarification. Next, we're going to discuss the writing process. Now, there are multiple formats available online, and depending on the organizations and the purpose and the agenda of the meeting, the format of the minutes of meeting can vary and be different. So it is more by experience, but we'll be giving you the general guidelines which can be used for your reference. Now, please ensure that once the meeting is over, it's time to pull together your notes and write the minutes. Here are some tips that might help you. Now, try to write the minutes as soon as possible after the meeting is over while everything is fresh in your mind. Review your outline and, if necessary, add additional notes or clarify points that were raised, and also ensure that all decisions, actions, and motions are clearly noted. Ensure you're including sufficient detail. So, for example, if there are some important members of the meeting and when the minutes are being created, it is usually recommended to include a short description of each action taken as well as the rationale behind the decision. If there are a lot of discussions before passing a motion, write down the major arguments both for and against that particular decision. Now, when you're editing your format or your final product, please ensure that you have brevity and clarity so that the minutes are easy to read. Now, when I mention brevity and clarity, that means it should be concise, it should be structured, and each point and each sentence should be clear and easy to understand. Now, in terms of format, here are other things that you can keep in mind. First, ensure that you are objective. So when I mention objective, the small details and the arguments and personal observations can be omitted. Just remember to stick to the point and try and summarize it and make it concise in as short a sentence as possible. The other mistake usually that people make is considering the tense that they try to use when you're writing the minutes of the meeting. So the tense used throughout should remain the same. So either you can keep it in the present, simple present, or you can keep it in the simple past. Try and avoid having variations of tenses very frequently. Also, if possible, and avoid using the names other than the ones which need to be recorded to have a record of your motions and seconds which are passed and were involved in the meeting. Now, if you need any other documents, don't try to summarize them. If you're referring to any document that was earlier considered or earlier was a part of any previous meetings, then please ensure that you are just referring to them and don't try to summarize them. Now, remember that the core content of the minutes of the meetings are usually the same and there are general guidelines for it. However, the format of the MOM depends on the standards and requirements of an organization. This is just to remind you once again what I said earlier. And since the primary functions of minutes is to record the decisions made, all official decisions must be included. Now, the minutes may end with a note of the time that the meeting was adjourned. And in some cases and scenarios, a draft copy of the MOM or the minutes of the meetings of the previous meeting is sent to all the members in advance to reflect and be referred to if a need arises to make amendments if required or necessary. Now, from this point on, I'm going to ensure that you have an example will be provided, and you should shortly see it on the screen, and using that you should be able to proceed further, and that should conclude for today. Thank you. So this is a draft, an example of the minutes of meeting which can be used. Now I'll begin by highlighting the sections. This currently is where you're selecting the date, the time, then we have the list of attendees. Next we have the agenda as per the priority and the action items that need to be noted. Moving down, we then have the actual notes of the meeting, and then if there are any notes for the next meeting that need to be made. Let me just erase these highlights and go back to the beginning. It's taking longer than expected. Now, coming back, so now we're going to start filling up. So as you can see, we can first select the date and then we can enter the date. We then can mention the start time and the end time can be entered at the end of the meeting. We can then highlight what is the topic or the meeting objective, entering the details of the attendees. Now, this can either be circulated in the beginning or it can be manually entered by you if you have these details. All these details can also be entered in the very beginning of the meeting, except leaving the time, because at times it gets postponed or delayed or preponed as well. Next, we move to the agenda, entering the details. You can mention the main topics, like over here I'm using examples of having to fix something or explain, describe, make a plot or analyze. Priorities can be assigned later on towards the end or during the meeting as and when you see fit. The actionable items then can be entered subsequently below. You move down to the actual notes of the meeting and you can select them as points that are being discussed or entered. So that would be all for today's session. Thank you for attending it and have a great day.